Is it all right to have visible pencil showing in your watercolour paintings? You know, a lot of beginners ask me that question, so I thought today we could paint something while we have a little chat about that. I'm working in a little watercolour journal today, a nice square one, and I think I'm in the mood for some flowers. So I think I'm going to put a little vase and then fill it with some hydrangeas, probably blue ones, because I've just bought a new blue paint that I'm dying to try out. So you can see I am starting with a very simple little pencil sketch. And I do want to get back to the question we're talking about, which was the issue of the visible pencil under the watercolour painting when it's finished. But I wanted to let you know that I do have a free guide which has got a whole lot of simple sketches like this one that you could use to quick start your own watercolour adventure. I'll pop the links in the description in case you're interested. Okay, so the short answer to the question of whether visible pencils are okay in watercolour paintings is definitely yes, they most certainly are. So if you're worried about that, please don't be. If you have a look at some of the most famous watercolour painters of the past, John Singer Sargent is a great example. You can see visible pencil lines in those paintings, and actually I love that. You know, you can see that it's not a detailed drawing. It's not like he's trying to do a sort of botanical illustrator style of sketch underneath his painting, but you can see the sort of gestural marks. It's really just about getting the things in the right position in the composition. Personally, I love to see this sort of thing in a painting. I really like how it puts the human back into the painting. You know, you can see that there's been something a little bit more to this process. It reminds us that a human being started with a blank piece of paper and then went through a series of steps to create something lovely for us to look at. So I love seeing the history of that process, the history of that journey. And it's almost like there's a little bit of that human fingerprint on it. And especially in this day and age, I think that's something to really cherish. So you can see I started with just a very few lines, really just guidelines to make sure I was getting my main blooms in the right sort of place and that they would be sitting roughly in the right spot above the vase. But mostly I was just dying to get on and put in my lovely blue paint, and that's what I'm painting with now. The sort of more muted blue is the colour I was talking about. It's called Lunar Blue, and it's a new paint to me. It's one of the Daniel Smith ones, and one of the things I love about it is that it granulates. I am painting hydrangeas, and I usually like my hydrangeas to be a bit more vibrant and sweet and pale, but these ones are going to be moody blue with the more muted lunar blue, just because I'm in the mood to play with that paint. Of course, I love dropping in extra colours, so I've put in a little bit of ultramarine blue as well, because that's going to give me a little bit more of that kind of sweet, fresh, vibrant blue that kind of springs to my mind when I think about blue hydrangeas. Now, getting back to our question about the visible pencil in the watercolour painting, you can probably see already that it's going to be pretty easy for me to cover up my pencil marks with my blue paint. And that's partly because I did quite a light drawing and I did very little drawing. I don't like to work from a detailed sketch because I think that makes you kind of tighten up and worry too much about your painting. The question of visible pencil lines in your painting is really something that's quite unique to watercolour. And that's because of one of the loveliest properties of watercolour, which is its transparency. It's something I really enjoy. But what we notice is that when we paint, when we lay down our colour, it will dry in a very transparent layer, showing you what's underneath. And it's this quality that allows us to do a lot of very effective layering, if we choose to, in watercolour, because you can always see what is underneath the paint. I say always, it's not exactly true. That you do get some watercolour paints that are semi-opaque, and you get some that are fully opaque. They're the colours I personally tend not to choose, because I do appreciate this transparent quality in watercolour. But the other thing is, if you're painting with really dark colours, then you probably have a very good chance of hiding any pencil drawings. But where you're going to have a very light section of the painting, if the colour is going to remain pale in that particular area, you do have a very good chance of being able to see the pencil marks. If you think back to that John Singer Sargent painting that we were looking at, it was in the pale blue areas around the lady's shoulders that we could mostly see the pencil marks. You know, there probably would have been more around and about, but the ones that are the most obvious are obviously in those areas where the paint color is the lightest. So all I think that really matters is that we have an understanding of how our paints and pencil and paper are going to interact, and then it's just a question of personal preference. And it also means you have choices. You might know instantly that you want soft watercolor paintings that are purely the color and don't show any sign of the pencil marks at all. That's entirely fine. You know, you can do exactly that if that's what you like. All you need to do is make sure that you choose the techniques that are going to deliver the effect that you prefer to see. If you do want to avoid visible pencil marks, there certainly are things you can do. There are different painting techniques that you can make sure you apply. And of course, there are different tools you can use, both the paint selection and the pencil that you choose to do the drawing with. There's quite a lot we can talk about with this. So I think maybe we need to make a few more videos on these sorts of topics. Let me know if that's something you'd be interested in the comments. And don't forget, you can also go completely the other way and choose the line and wash technique, which would involve making sure your lines are absolutely not just visible, but a very prominent part of the painting. So you would choose something stronger than a pencil, like perhaps a pen. That's another technique and a lot of fun to play with too. I highly recommend experimenting with all these different techniques and find the one that you love the most. For the most part, I think my paintings don't necessarily show the pencil marks, but as I was saying earlier, I'm really not that bothered if they do show. In fact, I secretly quite like it when one or two marks show up because, as I was saying, it reminds you that this is something that a human being sat down and made. I rather like seeing the evidence of the little journey from completely blank piece of paper to whatever you end up with. If you don't like the idea of a drawing showing, one of the easiest ways to make sure that's never going to happen is to avoid doing the drawing at all. Yes, it is possible to do a painting without doing a sketch first. People sometimes call this direct painting, and it does take a bit of a boldness of spirit, but it's really not quite as hard as it might seem. I've got another video where I tried this technique out. I'm going to pop that up on the screen along with the playlist of the rest of the videos for this visible pencil watercolor playlist. Happy painting!